Hello, Dr. Cisse covering anatomy and physiology. Today we'll do a review for our second exam. I'll talk about chapter 5 and 6, tissues and integumentary system. If you look at these two pictures here, the two on the left and the two on the right, on one you can see cells lined next to each other right here. And the other one you can see cells scattered everywhere. Now the difference alone can tell you whether a tissue is epithelial or connective. If it's epithelial, you will see cells next to each other standing, right? If it's connective, you will see cells mixed up everywhere with the fibers and with the ground substance. We'll talk about these in detail in this video. First, let's talk about epithelial. Now we know there are four types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, nervous. Let's talk about epithelial tissue. Based on the number of layers, we have two types of epithelial: simple with a one layer, stratified, many layers. Based on the shape of the cell, we have three kinds: squamous, cuboidal, columnar. So basically we can have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar. And then we can have stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar. Then we have two other that are like between them: pseudostratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. Looks like it's stratified, but it's not. It is ciliated, it has cilia, little hair, and it's columnar because they're long. So basically, when you look at these, it will tell you that epithelial tissues are tissues that are usually on top, have top and bottom, and the cells are next to each other. We call that cellularity. And as also, they are different shapes, right? Squamous means flat, like quarters. Cuboidal means like a cube, meaning the width and the length are almost equal. And then columnars are long. And then you have transitional. Transitional is something transitioning between squamous and cuboidal. Now let's look at this in closer. The simple squamous epithelium. Now it's simple because it's just one layer. Squamous because it's flat. Epithelium because it's epi means top. Thelium means layer. It's the top layer. It's so thin that it can allow diffusion of oxygen and CO2 in the lungs, for example. That's why the alveoli of lung have simple squamous epithelium. You also find them in glomeruli, endothelium, them in the inside lining of the body, and the serosa, the lining of the internal organs. What about the keratinized stratified squamous epithelium? Why keratinized? Because it has keratin. It's located on the epidermis, the top layer of the skin, the palm and sole heavily keratinized. So you can see here the food. If you have, for example, corns or calluses on your foot, it is because you have a lot of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Why it's called stratified? Because it has a multiple layer, it has a lot of layers on the skin. So that's why you see here keratinized. But we have certain areas where you have non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, which one does not have keratin, but it has a lot of layers. For example, the tongue. That makes sense because when you're talking, you move your tongue, you kind of remove the top layer of the skin, and that has to be multiplied. That has to be dividing all the time so that the old one can be replaced with a new one. So that's why you have it in the oral mucosa inside the mouth, esophagus, and the vagina. Those are non-keratinized, mean no keratin. Stratified means a lot of layer. Squamous, flat epithelium top layer. So non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. What about cuboidal epithelium? The size is like a cube. They allow absorption and secretion. What do they absorb? When you have filtration in the kidney, it is because something's going out to suck out all the nutrient and to produce the waste. It has to be absorbed, and it has to secrete. It has to hold things and secrete them. That's why the simple cuboidal epithelium function is mainly absorption and secretion. You find them in the liver and the thyroid, in the mammary and salivary gland, bronchial and kidney tubule. So the kidney filtration, secretion, and absorption happen through the simple cuboidal epithelium. What about the pseudo-stratified epithelium? The pseudo-stratified epithelium, pseudo means fake, stratified. So it's not stratified, it looks like, but it's not. So that tells us that these are long epithelium, right? Look at them here. And then the nuclei are like top and bottom. Here, not every cell reaches the bottom. So some cells are kind of squeezed not to reach the bottom. And the bottom is called the basement membrane because epithelial sits on the basement membrane before you can see connective tissue at the bottom. So you find this in the respiratory tract and portion of male urethra. Now you can see cilia here on top, little hair, that for example, when you sneeze, you throw out things because of these cilia. So pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium are in the respiratory tract. The transitional epithelium, we find them in the bladder. They transition between the squamous and the cuboidal. When the bladder is full, they become flat like squamous. If it's empty, they become taller, a little bit like a cuboidal. You find them in the urethra and the bladder. The basement membrane is the layer between the epithelium and the underlying connective tissue. So every epithelium sits on something. The basement membrane that will sit on some kind of connective tissue. So we have basal surface and apical surface. Basal means the bottom part of the epithelium, and apical means the top part of the epithelium. So those have high rate of mitosis. It means these cells divide a lot because from the basement membrane, the epithelium has to grow back again, just like cutting the tree and leaving the roots, and the roots can grow back again. Now let's talk about connective tissue. There are diverse, abundant, and less cells, more matrix. So you saw in epithelial, we have a lot of cells next to each other. But in connective, we have fewer cells scattered mixed with what ground substance and fibers. So most cells are not in direct contact with each other. Like we saw, the cells are scattered everywhere. What do they do? Connective tissue support, connect, and protect organs. They're variable, they're highly variable vascularity. It means that some of them have a lot of blood vessels, some of them do not. For example, cartilage have few or no blood vessels. So let's talk about the type of connective tissue. Based on the amount of fibers, in the fibrous connective tissue, we can have either loose connective tissue or dense. What makes it loose? The looseness depends on what the amount of fibers in it. If you have a less fiber, you're loose. More fiber, you're dense. So the two type of loose connective tissue are the areolar and the reticular. The picture we saw, it was areolar, right? And then the dense can be dense irregular or dense irregular connective tissue. What determines the density? The amount of fibers inside of it. And what makes it irregular? If the fibers follow each other. Irregular if they're in every direction. How many type of fiber we have? 3. Collagen fibers, reticular fiber, elastic fibers. And the ground substance of fiber connective tissue are usually a gelatinous to rubbery consistency. So they look like gelatin. So those can be glycosamine glycan or GAGs, proteoglycan or adhesive glycoprotein, or just a mixture of glucose, glyco, sugar type, gluey stuff mixed with protein. Here, areolar tissue, areolar or connective tissue. Why? Because they have cells scattered everywhere, fibers between them mixed in ground substance. That makes them connective tissue. So they have a lot of blood vessels, so they're highly vascularized. So they underlies epithelial. So under epithelial tissue, we have areolar tissue. They're also in serous membrane between muscles. Like for example, when you cut your meat, those little fluffy thing or areolar tissue. Reticular tissues are also connective. Why? Because you have cells, fibers, and ground substance. If you were epithelial, you would see cells next to each other. That's why you know reticular is connective tissue. Where do you find them? For example, the spleen or the lymph node, reticular tissue. The dense regular connective tissue. Why is dense? It has a lot of fibers. Why irregular? The fibers are regular, they go in the same direction. Do you find them where? In tendons and ligaments. What about the dense irregular connective tissue? It is in the skin. What part of the skin? The dermis of the skin. But what layer of the dermis? The reticular layer. Because remember, the skin has papillary and reticular. So it's the second layer of the dermis. So we'll talk about the skin in a few seconds. I'll explain this. So the deeper layer of skin capsule around organs. So the dense irregular, like when you have organ, like for example, the heart, the kidney, they're in bags. Those bags are made of dense irregular connective tissues. What about cartilage? Are cartilages epithelial or connective? Of course, connective. Why? Because cartilage have the three things: cells, like chondrocyte and chondroblast. They have fibers, and they have ground substance, right? For example, if the organ is very elastic, you will have elastic fiber. For example, the ear, the tip of the nose, for example, those are cartilages. They are connective tissue. How many type of cartilage we have? Three: hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, elastic cartilage. And the elastic cartilage is the cartilage that makes up our ear. The external ear is elastic cartilage. It is a cartilage. It is a connective tissue. What about blood? Is blood epithelial or connective? Of course, connective. Why? It has cells, ground substance, and fiber. What kind of connective tissue? Fluid connective tissue. What is the function of blood? To take nutrients or carbon dioxide or CO2 around the body. Take it, give every cell their nutrient, including oxygen, and take away CO2 or waste out of the body. The cells are erythrocyte and leukocyte, of course. We have ground substance, which in this case will be the plasma, the liquid part of the blood. What about bone? Bone is connective tissue. Why? Because it has cells, ground substance, and fiber. What kind of fiber? Collagen fiber. Here you can see a bone here with the epiphysis, diaphysis, and metaphysis, right? So bones are connective tissue. How do you know? You look at them and they look at tree trunk. Between there you have cells, you have ground substance, you have collagen fiber. So what is epiphyseal plate and epithelial line? The epiphyseal plate is called a growth plate. It's the area of a hyaline cartilage, hyaline, that separates the epiphysis and diaphysis of children's bone. Why this is important? Because when children grow, the growth happens at the specific line between the epiphysis and diaphysis called the epiphyseal line. That's important because they separate the epiphysis from the diaphysis. What is apoptosis? Is the programmed cell death. Every cell comes with a birth date and the death date basically. When that time comes, the cell will die. The death of the cell naturally, because its time has come, is called apoptosis. Usually, it's called the suicide program, programmed cell death. Usually people who have cells that will not die will develop into cancer, right? Cancer is just the cell not going through apoptosis, not dying on time. This is the skin. Let's talk about the skin. We have five layers of the epidermis. Let's go back now. Let's talk about the skin itself. We have three main layers, right? The epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. The epidermis has five layers: corneum, so stratum corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, basal. Come, let's get sunburn. Those are the five layers of the epidermis in the thick skin, which will be what? The palm of the hand and the sole of the feet. But if it's just the regular skin everywhere else, it'll be four layer, it'll be thin skin, it'll be come, get, sunburn. So the lucidum will be missing. The lucidum is only in thick skin. And here you can see in the dermis here, we have two layers. We have papillary layer, reticular layer. The reticular layer of the dermis right here, this thick one, represent the leather. So when you have leather shoes or leather bag, it is the reticular layer of the dermis of the skin. When you have injection done under the skin, it's called subcutaneous injection. We do it under the skin in the subcutaneous, which is not part of the skin, it's just below the skin. Let's talk about the melanocyte and keratinocyte. Melanocyte determine the skin color. Melanin. Keratinocytes are the cells that are well developed in calluses and corn in thick skin. So now, I think we made it in less than 15 minutes, right? Exam 2 review, chapter 6. So we need to know epithelial, connective tissue. We need to know the different kind of tissue. We need to understand also that the cartilage, hyaline cartilage, does not have blood vessels. All right. So this is the end of exam 2 review, chapter 5 and 6, tissue integumentary system, and I'll see you in class. Thank you very much.